I didn't come back to the ranch looking for trouble. I came because Grandma Rose was gone and someone had to deal with what she left behind. The truck kicked up dust as I pulled into the yard, and that's when I saw her, Casey, leaning against the barn door like she'd been waiting, dark hair pulled back, work shirt rolled to her elbows, boots that had seen real use. She didn't wave, didn't smile, just watched me park with those unreadable eyes. "You must be the granddaughter," she said when I climbed out. Her voice was quiet, careful. "And you're the forewoman." "That's right." The silence stretched between us like a challenge. Behind her, I could see the fence line where our property met the neighbors. Half the posts were leaning, wire sagging in places. Broken. "Guess we'll need to fix that together," I said, nodding toward the fence. Casey's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "Guess we will." The lawyer's office still smelled like old coffee and disappointment when I read the will for the third time. Casey sat across from me, hands folded, face giving nothing away. "It says here you stay on as forewoman for a minimum of 2 years," I said, looking up from the papers, "that you have full authority over day-to-day operations. Your grandmother was specific about that. 8 years you've been here. 8 years. Casey's fingers tapped once against her knee. "I know every fence post, every water source, every place the cattle like to hide when storms roll in." I set the papers down. The morning light coming through the kitchen window caught the dust motes floating between us, made everything feel suspended, waiting. "Coffee's ready," Casey said, standing. She moved to the counter with the kind of efficiency that comes from knowing exactly where everything belongs. 2 mugs, sugar for me, black for her. She'd already learned my preferences somehow. "So, what's the plan?" I asked, accepting the mug. Her fingers brushed mine for just a second when she handed it over. Calloused, warm. Casey shrugged. "Depends what you want to do with the place. What do you think I should do?" "Not my call." But her expression said otherwise. There was something guarded there, something that made my chest feel tight, like she was already preparing for disappointment. "Show me around," I said. "The boundaries, the work that needs doing, help me understand what I'm dealing with." We walked the property line in relative silence. Casey pointed out the water tank that needed repair, the section of pasture that flooded in heavy rain, the old equipment shed where she'd organized everything with military precision. She moved across the land like she was part of it, each step deliberate and sure. I found myself watching the way her shoulders shifted when she bent to examine a fence post, the way she pushed her hair back when the wind caught it, the way she seemed to listen to something I couldn't hear. "This section here," she said, stopping at a gate that hung crooked on its hinges. "Your grandmother always said it was the heart of the ranch. Everything flows from here? And what do you say?" Casey looked at me then. Really looked. For the first time since I'd arrived. Her eyes were the color of storm clouds, and just as hard to read. "I say some things are worth protecting." The air between us felt charged, like the moment before lightning strikes. I didn't know what to say to that, so I said nothing. But I felt it. That pull. That recognition of something I wasn't ready to name. Casey handed me a pair of work gloves the next morning. Leather, worn soft in places where hands had gripped tools day after day. "We'll start with the north fence," she said. "Posts are rotting out." I followed her to the truck bed, where she'd already loaded wire, metal posts, a post hole digger that looked like it weighed more than I did. She lifted everything with the kind of easy strength that made my city-soft muscles feel inadequate. "You ever done fence work?" Casey asked, shouldering the digger. "Not exactly." She nodded like she'd expected that answer. "It's not complicated. Just takes patience." We walked to where the fence line disappeared into tall grass. Casey knelt beside the first rotted post, ran her hands along the wood like she was checking for fever. Her movements were sure, economical, no wasted motion. "See how the base is soft here?" She pressed against the wood with her thumb, and it gave way like wet paper. "Moisture gets in, rot spreads up, whole thing becomes useless." She stood, brushed dirt from her knees. "Hand me the wire cutters." I fumbled through the tool belt she'd given me, fingers clumsy with unfamiliarity. When I finally found them, our hands touched as I passed them over. Just for a second. Just long enough for me to notice how steady she was while I felt like I was shaking. Casey cut the old wire with quick, precise snips. The fence section sagged, then fell away completely. She coiled the wire without looking, muscle memory guiding her hands. Now we dig. The post hole digger was heavier than it looked. I managed 3 scoops before my shoulders started burning. Casey watched without comment, but when I paused to catch my breath, she stepped forward. Like this, she said, positioning herself behind me. Her hands covered mine on the handles. Use your legs, not your back. Her body was close enough that I could feel the heat radiating from her skin, smell the soap she used, something clean and simple. When we lifted together, the digger moved like it was weightless. Better, she said, stepping back. But not immediately. For just a moment, we stayed like that. Connected. The silence that followed wasn't uncomfortable exactly, but it was heavy, full of things neither of us was saying. Casey cleared her throat and moved to set the new post. Hold this steady, she said. I gripped the metal post while she packed dirt around the base. Her hands worked quickly, efficiently, tamping down soil with the same focused attention she gave everything else. I found myself studying the way she moved, the flex of muscle in her forearms, the concentration that made her bottom lip catch between her teeth. You're staring, Casey said without looking up. Heat flooded my face. I'm watching you work, learning. Uh-huh. But when she glanced up, there was something different in her expression. Not quite a smile, but close. The corners of her mouth lifted just enough to change everything. We worked through the morning, replacing posts, stretching new wire. Casey's hands guided mine when I struggled with the wire stretchers, showed me how to twist the ties so they'd hold. Her patience was endless, but she didn't waste words explaining things twice. By noon, we'd finished a section that would have taken me all week alone. Casey stepped back to survey our work, hands on her hips. Not bad for a beginner, she said again. Thanks for not letting me electrocute myself. Fence isn't electric. I know that. Casey looked at me sideways, and there it was again. That almost smile, quick as summer lightning, but I caught it. Come on, she said, gathering tools. Let's get some lunch. Walking back toward the house, I realized something had shifted between us. Some invisible barrier had lowered just enough to let a little light through. Casey still wasn't talking much, but the silence felt different now, shared instead of guarded. I was in trouble, and I knew it. The storm hit just after midnight. I woke to the sound of wind tearing at the house, rain hammering against windows like it was trying to get inside. Lightning lit up my bedroom in stark white flashes, and somewhere in the distance I could hear metal creaking, wood splintering. By morning, the damage was clear. The main gate to the south pasture hung at a broken angle, one hinge torn completely free. The latch mechanism was twisted beyond repair, and worst of all, there was a gap wide enough for cattle to wander through. Casey was already there when I arrived, standing in ankle-deep mud, surveying the wreckage. Her hair was damp from the drizzle that hadn't stopped since dawn, and her boots were caked with clay that made each step a struggle. How bad is it? I called out, picking my way carefully across the soggy ground. Bad enough. Gate's useless, and we've got 40 head in this pasture. They get out. They'll scatter across 3 counties. She bent to examine the broken hinge, water dripping from the brim of her hat. Her jaw was set. In that way, I was learning, meant she was working through a problem, calculating solutions. Can we fix it? Casey straightened, wiping her hands on her jeans. We can try, but we need to move fast. Cattle are already testing that gap. She was right. I could see several cows near the broken section, nosing at the opening with the kind of curiosity that spelled trouble. What do you need me to do? Help me get this gate off what's left of its hinges. We'll have to rebuild the whole frame. Working together in the mud was like learning a new kind of dance. Casey would point, I'd lift. She'd hold, I'd hammer. Every movement had to be coordinated, or we'd lose our footing in the slick clay. The gate was heavier than it looked, waterlogged wood and twisted metal that fought us every step of the way. When we finally wrestled it free, I lost my balance completely. My boots slipped out from under me, and I went down hard, landing on my back in the mud with a splash that sent dirty water flying. Casey was beside me before I could even process what had happened. Her hand found my shoulder, then slipped behind my back, helping me sit up. Her other hand cupped my elbow, steadying me. You hurt? Just my pride? But she didn't let go immediately. Her hands stayed where they were, warm and solid against the chill of wet clothes and morning air. I could feel the calluses on her palms through my shirt, the careful strength in her fingers. You're shaking, she said quietly. I was, but not from cold. Casey's face was close enough that I could see the flecks of gold in her storm-colored eyes, close enough that I could count the raindrops caught in her eyelashes. The air between us felt thick, charged with more than just the lingering electricity of the storm. For a moment, neither of us moved. Casey's thumb brushed against my shoulder blade, just once, like she wasn't entirely aware she was doing it. Her lips parted slightly, and I thought, a cow lowed somewhere behind us, long and plaintive, and the spell broke. Casey pulled back, clearing her throat, offering me her hand to help me stand. We should get you cleaned up, she said, but her voice sounded different, rougher. The gate first. Casey nodded, but she kept one hand on my arm until she was sure I had my footing. Even then, she stayed close as we worked, ready to catch me if I slipped again. We spent the next 3 hours rebuilding the gate frame, setting new posts in concrete that we mixed right there in the mud. Casey worked with fierce concentration like she was trying to prove something to the storm that had dared to damage her land. Because that's what it was, I realized. Her land. Not legally, maybe, but in every way that mattered. She knew every inch of it, cared for it with the kind of devotion that ran deeper than ownership. When we finally hung the new gate, testing the hinges to make sure they'd hold, Casey stepped back with satisfaction written across her mud-streaked face. That'll hold, she said. Thanks to you. Casey shrugged, but I caught her looking at me with something that might have been approval, or maybe something else entirely. Come on, she said, let's get dry. Evening meals became a ritual neither of us acknowledged, but both of us needed. Casey would appear in the kitchen around 6, boots left by the door, sleeves rolled up to wash her hands, at the sink. I'd cook whatever I could manage with the contents of Grandma's pantry, and we'd sit across from each other at the old oak table, sharing food and careful conversation. The first few nights we talked about work, which pastures needed attention, when to call the vet, how to handle the temperamental tractor that only started if you knew exactly where to kick it. Safe topics, necessary ones. But gradually, the conversations shifted. Your grandmother used to sit right there, Casey said one evening, nodding toward my chair. She'd make coffee after dinner, real strong stuff that could wake the dead. Said it helped her think. What did she think about? Casey's fork paused halfway to her mouth. Everything. The ranch, the weather, people she'd lost. She talked about you sometimes. What did she say? That you were stubborn like her. That you'd figure things out eventually, but you'd have to do it your own way. I felt something twist in my chest. She never told me that. She wasn't much for saying things directly, but she worried about you in the city. Said it was too far from anything real. Casey's voice was soft when she talked about Grandma Rose, gentler than I'd heard it any other time. Her whole face changed like she was remembering something precious. She taught you to cook? I asked, gesturing at the perfectly seasoned vegetables on my plate. Among other things, said a person who couldn't feed themselves properly had no business taking care of animals. What else did she teach you? Casey looked down at her plate, and I saw color rise in her cheeks. How to fix engines, how to read weather patterns, how to know when something was worth fighting for. The way she said that last part made my pulse quicken. There was weight behind the words, meaning I wasn't sure I was ready to unpack. What about before? I asked. Before you came here? Casey's expression shuddered immediately. The openness that had been growing between us all week disappeared behind that familiar wall of careful neutrality. Not much to say about before. Come on, 8 years is a long time to work somewhere without having a life before it. Some lives aren't worth talking about. Her tone had gone flat, final, but I could see tension in the line of her shoulders, the way her hands had stilled on her fork. Whatever came before the ranch, it wasn't just private. It was painful. I wanted to push, to understand what had brought her here, what made her so determined to protect this place like it was the only safe harbor in a storm, but something in her expression warned me off. "More coffee?" I asked instead. Casey nodded, relief flickering across her face so quickly I almost missed it. As the days passed, I found myself looking forward to these dinners more than I wanted to admit. The way Casey would lean back in her chair when she was relaxed, one arm draped over the back. The way she'd pause mid-sentence sometimes, like she was editing herself, deciding how much to reveal. The way she watched me when she thought I wasn't paying attention. I caught her doing it one evening when I was clearing plates. Her eyes followed my movements around the kitchen, and there was something in her gaze that made my skin feel too warm, too tight. "You don't have to do the dishes," she said when I started running water in the sink. "I don't mind. Your grandmother always said guests shouldn't clean up. I'm not a guest. This is my house now." Casey went quiet at that, and when I glanced over, she was staring at her coffee cup like it held answers to questions she wasn't ready to ask. "Is it?" she said finally. "Your house? What do you mean?" "Nothing. Forget I said anything." But I couldn't forget. The question hung between us through the rest of the evening, through the careful goodnights and the sound of Casey's boots on the porch steps as she headed back to her small cabin behind the barn. Lying in bed that night, I realized I'd been thinking of the ranch as temporary, a problem to solve, a responsibility to manage until I could figure out what came next. But Casey's question made me wonder if that's really what I wanted, or if what I wanted was sitting across from me every evening, sharing stories about my grandmother and watching me with those storm cloud eyes like I was something worth paying attention to. I didn't mean for it to come out the way it did. We were sitting on the porch after dinner, watching the sun sink behind the western ridge, and Casey was telling me about the time Grandma Rose chased off a bear with nothing but a wooden spoon and pure determination. "She was something else," Casey said, shaking her head. "Fearless." "She was stubborn," I corrected. "There's a difference." Casey looked at me sideways. "Is there?" The question hung in the evening air between us. I could feel her waiting for something, some indication of where my head was at, what I was planning. The silence stretched until it became uncomfortable. "I need to tell you something," I said finally. Casey's whole body went still. Not just quiet, but still in the way animals get when they sense danger. Her hands stopped moving on the porch railing. Her breathing seemed to pause. "The ranch," I continued, not looking at her. "I was planning to sell it. After the 2 years, that was always the plan." I heard her exhale, slow and controlled. When I finally looked over, her face had gone completely blank. That careful mask she wore when she was protecting herself from something that might hurt. "I see. Do you? You inherit a place you never wanted, wait out the minimum time required by the will, then cash out. Makes sense." Her voice was steady, but I could hear the hurt underneath, the resignation, like she'd been expecting this conversation but hoping it would never come. "It's not that simple, isn't it?" Casey stood up, walked to the edge of the porch. Her back was rigid, shoulders set in a line that screamed defense. When she spoke again, her words came out quiet and sharp. "What happens to the cattle, the land, the people who depend on this place? There are other ranches, other jobs." Casey laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Right, other jobs. You're good at what you do. Any ranch would be lucky to have you. You don't get it." Casey turned around, and for the first time since I'd known her, her composure cracked. "This isn't just a job for me. This is home. This is the only place I've ever felt like I belonged." The raw pain in her voice hit me like a physical blow. I'd been thinking about the ranch as property, as an asset to be managed, but for Casey, it was something else entirely. "Where would you go?" I asked. "I don't know." Casey's hands clenched into fists at her sides. "I've been here 8 years. Before that," she trailed off, shook her head. "Let's just say I don't have a lot of options." "What do you mean?" "I mean, I came here with nothing. No references, no family, no place to go back to." Your grandmother took a chance on me when nobody else would. Casey's voice was getting rougher, more strained. I could see her fighting to keep control, to not let me see how much this was costing her. She gave me a chance to prove myself, to build something. And I did. I built this place into something worth having. I know every cow, every fence post, every inch of ground that floods when it rains too hard. She gestured toward the pastures, the barn, the land that stretched out in all directions under the darkening sky. I know which gate sticks in winter, which water tank needs to be checked twice a day, where the best grazing is in drought years. I know because I care, because this matters to me in a way it never will to some new owner who sees it as an investment. The words hung between us like an accusation, and maybe they were. You think I don't care? I think you see dollar signs where I see home. That stung because it was partially true, or had been true when I first arrived. But something had changed over the past weeks, something I wasn't ready to examine too closely. It's not about the money, I said. Then what's it about? I didn't have an answer for that. Or I did, but it wasn't one I was ready to give. Because the truth was, I'd been running from this place my whole life, from the responsibility of it, from the way it tied you down, made you accountable to something bigger than yourself. I have a life in the city, I said finally. A career, people depending on me there. And what about the people depending on you here? Casey's eyes were bright with unshed tears, but her voice stayed steady, strong. Even when she was breaking, she was stronger than I was. I can't just abandon everything I've built. But I can? The question hit like a slap, because that's exactly what I was asking her to do. Abandon the life she'd built, the home she'd made, the only place she'd ever felt like she belonged. Casey, forget it. Casey stepped back, putting distance between us. I get it. I always knew this was temporary. I just thought maybe... She shook her head. Doesn't matter what I thought. She turned to go, and I felt something panic inside my chest. Wait. Casey paused but didn't turn around. I'm not saying it's decided. I'm just saying that was the plan. But plans can change. Can they? I don't know. Maybe. Casey looked back at me then, and I saw something I hadn't expected. Hope, fragile and careful, but there. What would it take, she asked, to change your mind? I stared at her, at the way the porch light caught the gold in her eyes, at the way she was holding herself like she was afraid to breathe too hard and shatter whatever possibility hung between us. I don't know that either. 3 days later, the sky turned the color of old bruises. Casey stood on the porch, studying the horizon with the kind of attention that made my skin prickle. Storm's coming, she said. Big one. The air felt heavy, charged with electricity that made the horses restless in their stalls. Even the cattle seemed to sense something, clustering together in the near pasture instead of spreading out to graze. How can you tell? Casey pointed toward the western ridge. See how the clouds are building? In the way the wind keeps shifting direction? We've got maybe 2 hours before it hits. She was already moving, checking her watch, calculating something in her head that I couldn't follow. The herd in the far pasture, she said. They're too exposed out there. If this storm's as bad as I think it's going to be, we need to move them to the shelter near the barn. In the dark? We don't have a choice. Storm hits, they'll panic. 40 head of panicked cattle in an open field during a lightning storm is a recipe for disaster. Casey was already heading for the barn, her movements quick and purposeful. I followed, trying to match her pace, trying not to think about how little I knew about handling cattle in the best of circumstances, let alone during a storm. She had the horses saddled by the time the first drops of rain started falling. Big, fat drops that splattered against the barn roof like warnings. Stay close to me, Casey said, handing me the reins to the gentler of the 2 horses. Don't try to be a hero. These animals are going to be spooked, and spooked cattle don't think straight. We rode out as the storm gathered strength above us. The wind was picking up, bending the grass in waves that looked like the land itself was breathing. Lightning flickered in the distance, still far enough away that the thunder took long seconds to reach us. The cattle were huddled together when we found them, 40 head of nervous energy waiting for an excuse to bolt. Casey circled around behind them, her horse moving with the kind of precision that comes from years of Practice. Easy, she called to them, her voice carrying that calm authority I'd heard her use with everything from broken gates to spooked horses. Easy now. The first crack of thunder made them jump. Not bolt, not yet, but I could see the tension ripple through the herd like electricity. Casey was already moving, positioning herself to guide them toward the gate that led back toward the barn. Get on their left side, she called to me. Keep them moving, but don't crowd them. I tried to do what she said, but my horse could sense my uncertainty. Every time I hesitated, he hesitated too, and the cattle picked up on it immediately. They started to spread out, testing the boundaries Casey was trying to establish. The rain was coming harder now, turning the ground slick and treacherous. Lightning split the sky directly overhead, and the thunder that followed was immediate, deafening. That's when they bolted. 40 head of cattle suddenly decided they wanted to be anywhere but where they were. They scattered in 3 different directions, some heading for the fence line, others toward the creek, a few brave souls making a break for the open range beyond the property. Casey was everywhere at once, her horse cutting and weaving between the panicked animals, turning them back toward the group with movements so fluid they looked choreographed. But there were too many, moving too fast, and I could see her horse starting to tire. The ones by the creek, she shouted over the storm. Can you turn them back? I tried. God knows I tried. But when my horse slipped in the mud trying to cut off a particularly determined steer, I knew I was in trouble. The horse went down on his front knees, throwing me forward against his neck, and for a terrifying moment, I thought we were both going down. That's when Casey appeared beside me. Her horse slammed into the steer, turning him back toward the herd, with an impact that I felt in my bones. But the effort cost her. Her horse stumbled, caught his footing, then stumbled again. I watched it happen, like it was in slow motion. Casey's horse stepped in a hole hidden by the tall grass, his front leg buckling at an angle that made my stomach lurch. Casey went over his head, hitting the ground hard enough that I heard the impact over the storm. She didn't get up. I was off my horse before I realized I'd made the decision, running through mud that grabbed at my boots with every step. Casey was lying on her side, one arm trapped beneath her, rain streaming down her face. Casey! Her eyes opened when I touched her shoulder, but they were unfocused, confused. The cattle, she said, trying to sit up. Forget the cattle. I slipped my arm under her good shoulder, helping her to her feet. She swayed against me, and I could feel her trembling. Can you ride? I think so. But when she tried to put weight on her left arm, she went white. I could see her fighting not to cry out, biting down on whatever sound wanted, to escape. We're getting you back to the house, I said. The ride back was the longest 15 minutes of my life. Casey sat behind me on my horse, her good arm wrapped around my waist, her injured shoulder pressed against my back. I could feel every time she tensed with pain, every careful breath she took to keep from making noise. By the time we reached the house, she was barely conscious. I half carried her inside, settling her on the couch while I fumbled for the lamp. In the yellow light, I could see how pale she'd gotten, how carefully she was holding her left arm against her body. Let me see, I said, kneeling beside the couch. Casey's shirt was torn at the shoulder, and when I carefully peeled it back, I could see the damage. Her shoulder was already swelling, the skin darkening with what was going to be a spectacular bruise. I don't think it's broken, I said, trying to sound more confident than I felt. Dislocated, maybe. Casey's voice was tight with pain. There's a first aid kit in the kitchen, ice packs in the freezer. I found what I needed, moving by instinct more than knowledge. When I came back, Casey was staring at the ceiling, her jaw clenched against the pain. This is going to hurt, I warned, settling the ice pack against her shoulder. Casey nodded, but when the cold hit her injured skin, she couldn't stop the sharp intake of breath. Her good hand found mine, gripping tight enough that I could feel her pulse hammering against my wrist. The ranch, she said suddenly. If something happens to me, if I can't work, nothing's going to happen to you. But if it does... Casey's eyes found mine, and I saw fear there that had nothing to do with physical pain. Promise me you won't sell it just because I'm not here to run it. Casey, promise me. Thunder crashed overhead, so close it seemed to shake the house. In the lamplight, Casey looked younger somehow, vulnerable in a way I'd never seen her. I'm afraid, she said quietly. I'm afraid of losing this place, of losing... She trailed off, but her hand was still holding mine, and I thought I knew what she couldn't say. "You're not going to lose anything," I said. But even as I said it, I knew it wasn't a promise I could make. Because the truth was, I was afraid, too. Afraid of the way my heart hammered every time she looked at me. Afraid of how much I'd started to care about this place, about her, about the life we might build together if I was brave enough to try. Lightning lit up the windows, and for just a moment, Casey's face was illuminated in stark detail. Her eyes were fixed on mine, and I saw something there that made my breath catch. Thunder rolled over us again, but neither of us moved. The space between us felt charged with more than just the storm outside. "I should check your shoulder again," I said, but my voice came out rougher than I intended. Casey nodded, but she didn't let go of my hand. I woke to the sound of Casey moving. Around in the kitchen, the careful clink of dishes and the soft scrape of a chair being pulled out from the table. For a moment, I lay still, remembering the weight of her hand in mine, the way she'd looked at me in the lamplight before exhaustion finally claimed her. I'd insisted she stay in the guest room instead of walking back to her cabin in the storm. She'd protested, said she was fine, but I could see the pain etched in the lines around her eyes every time she moved her shoulder. When I finally made it downstairs, Casey was sitting at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee, her left arm in a makeshift sling I'd fashioned from one of Grandma's old dish towels. She looked up when I entered, then immediately looked away. "Morning," she said to her coffee cup. "How's the shoulder?" "Better, thanks for," she gestured vaguely with her good hand, "for taking care of things." The careful politeness in her voice made my chest ache. We were back to being strangers, pretending the storm hadn't happened, pretending I hadn't seen her vulnerable and afraid. "You should see a doctor," I said, pouring myself coffee from the pot she'd made. "It's fine. Just bruised." "Casey." I said it's fine. I sat down across from her, noting how she kept her eyes fixed on the window instead of looking at me. Outside, the morning was clear and bright, like the storm had washed the world clean, but inside, the air between us felt thick with things we weren't saying. "About last night?" I started. "What about it?" "When you said you were afraid, I was hurt and not thinking straight." Casey's voice was flat, final. "People say things when they're in pain." "Do they?" She finally looked at me then, and I saw the walls back up, solid and impenetrable. Whatever openness had existed between us in the lamplight was gone, replaced by that careful, professional distance I thought we were moving past. "The cattle got scattered in the storm," she said, changing the subject with the subtlety of a sledgehammer. "I need to ride out and do a count. Make sure we didn't lose any. With your shoulder like that, I can manage." "I'll come with you." Casey shook her head. "You've got other things to worry about. I can handle the ranch work." The dismissal stung more than it should have. We finished breakfast in silence, Casey picking at her eggs with her good hand while I pretended to read the weather report on my phone. When she stood to go, I watched her struggle to put on her jacket, her jaw clenched against the pain of moving her injured arm. "Let me help. I've got it." But she didn't have it. I could see her fighting with the sleeve, trying to work her arm through without jarring her shoulder. After a moment of watching her struggle, I stood and moved behind her, gently guiding the jacket over her injured arm. Casey went still at my touch. I could feel the tension in her shoulders, the way she was holding her breath. My hands lingered longer than necessary, smoothing the fabric across her back, and for just a second I thought she might lean into the contact. Instead, she stepped away. "Thanks," she said without turning around. Then she was gone, the screen door slamming behind her. I spent the morning pacing the house like a caged animal, finding busy work to keep my hands occupied while my mind churned. Every few minutes, I'd catch myself looking out the window, watching for Casey's return. When she finally came back around noon, I was waiting on the porch with a sandwich and a glass of water. She looked exhausted, her face pale with pain she was trying to hide. "All accounted for?" I asked. "Mostly. Lost 2 steers, but they'll probably wander back when they get hungry." Casey accepted the sandwich but didn't sit down. "I'll head out again this afternoon. Check the far pasture." "You need to rest." "I need to do my job." The words hung between us like a challenge. Casey's expression was carefully neutral, but I could see the hurt underneath, the fear that I was looking for excuses to replace her, to prove she wasn't essential. "That's not what this is about," I said. "Isn't it?" Casey set the sandwich down untouched and walked toward the barn. I followed, my frustration building with every step. "You're being ridiculous." "Am I?" Casey stopped and turned to face me. "You've made it pretty clear what you think of this place, what you think of the people who care about it. That's not fair." "Fair?" Casey laughed, but there was no humor in it. "You want to talk about fair? Fair would be giving a damn about something other than your exit strategy." The accusation hit like a physical blow. "You don't know what you're talking about." "Don't I? You've been here 3 weeks and you're already planning your escape. You think I don't see the way you look at this place, like it's a burden you can't wait to shed?" "It's not that simple." "It never is it?" Casey turned toward the barn again, but I grabbed her good arm, stopping her. "Wait." She went still under my touch, but she didn't pull away. When she looked at me, I saw something raw and desperate in her eyes. "I can't do this," she said quietly. "I can't pretend last night didn't happen, and I can't pretend it did. I can't watch you plan your life around leaving when all I want is for you to stay." The confession hung between us like a bridge. Neither of us was sure we could cross. Casey's face was flushed, whether from embarrassment or pain, or something else entirely. "Casey, I'm packing my things," she said, pulling away from my touch. "I'll be out by evening. You can't leave. Watch me." She disappeared into the barn, leaving me standing in the yard with my heart hammering against my ribs. Through the open door, I could hear her moving around, the sound of things being gathered, sorted, packed away. I stood there for a long time, paralyzed by the realization that I was about to lose something I hadn't even known I wanted. Something that mattered more than the plans I'd made, more than the life I thought I was supposed to want. By the time I found the courage to follow her, Casey was loading a duffel bag into the back of her truck. "You're really going to do this?" I asked, watching Casey toss her last bag into the truck bed. She didn't look at me when she answered. "Nothing left to do. There's everything left to do." Casey slammed the tailgate shut with more force than necessary. Like what? Watch you count down the days until you can sell this place? Pretend I don't care that you're planning to tear apart the only home I've ever had? "I'm not selling." The words came out before I'd fully formed the decision, but once they were in the air between us, I knew they were true. Casey's hands went still on her truck keys. "What did you say?" "I'm not selling the ranch." I stepped closer, my heart hammering against my ribs. "I'm staying." Casey turned around slowly, like she was afraid sudden movement might shatter whatever possibility hung between us. Her eyes searched my face, looking for the catch, the condition that would make this another disappointment. "For how long?" "For good. For as long as you'll have me." "I don't understand." I moved closer, close enough to see the gold flecks in her storm-colored eyes, close enough to smell the soap she used and the lingering scent of hay from the barn. "I understand now," I said. "What my grandmother saw in this place, what you see in it. It's not just land. It's home." Casey's jaw worked like she was trying to swallow words that wanted to escape. "What changed your mind?" "You did." The confession hung between us, raw and honest. Casey's eyes widened, and I saw something crack in her careful composure. "The way you care for this place," I continued. "The way you know every fence post, every water source, every place the cattle like to hide. The way you look at the land like it's something precious. The way you looked at me last night like I was something precious too." Casey's breath caught. "I didn't mean for you to see that." "I'm glad I did." We stood there in the afternoon sun, two women who'd been circling each other for weeks, finally close enough to touch. Casey's good hand was trembling at her side. "I want to build something here," I said. "With you. Not as owner and employee, but as partners. Equal partners in everything." "Everything?" The question was barely a whisper, but it carried the weight of every unspoken moment between us, every careful glance, every accidental touch, every shared silence that had felt heavy with possibility. "Everything." Casey stepped closer, closing the distance between us until I could feel the warmth radiating from her skin. Her good hand came up to cup my cheek, thumb brushing across my cheekbone with infinite gentleness. "Are you sure?" she asked. "Because I can't do this halfway. I can't pretend to be just your business partner when what I want is so much more." "What do you want?" "You," Casey said simply. "All of you. Your stubborn determination and your city soft hands and the way you look at me like I'm worth something. I want to wake up next to you and work beside you and build a life that's ours." My heart felt like it might burst from the honesty in her voice, the vulnerability she was offering me like a gift. "Then that's what we'll do." Casey's smile started slow, spreading across her face like sunrise. "You mean it?" "I mean it." She leaned forward then, her forehead touching mine, her breath warm against my lips. "What about your life in the city?" "This is my life now." Casey's hand slipped to the back of my neck, fingers tangling in my hair. When she kissed me, it was soft and careful, like she was afraid I might disappear if she held on too tight. But I wasn't going anywhere. Not anymore. When we finally broke apart, Casey was crying. Happy tears that caught the afternoon light and made her eyes shine like stars. "Partners?" she asked. "Partners," I agreed, covering her hand with mine where it rested against the fence post we'd repaired together weeks ago. "In everything." The silence that settled between us wasn't empty anymore. It was full of possibility, full of the future we were going to build together on land that belonged to both of us now. 6 months later, we're working on a new section of fence along the eastern boundary. Casey's shoulder healed clean, and she moves with that same sure confidence I fell in love with. But now when she catches me watching, she smiles instead of looking away. We've learned that some silences don't need words to fill them. Sometimes the most important conversations happen in the space between heartbeats, in the brush of fingers passing tools, in the way she looks at me across the dinner table like I'm home. If you've ever found yourself in a place you didn't expect, with someone who changed everything you thought you wanted, share your story below. And don't forget to subscribe for more stories about finding home in the most unexpected places.